Right. Hello, everybody. Today is March the 23rd, and Mars has just ingressed into Pisces, and we are just a couple days away from the lunar eclipse in Libra. And just right off the bat, I have to mention that I just saw the news today about a terrorist attack in Russia, and I obviously am including it because there's something going on where I have to. Well, I mean, I'll get into this later because I wanted to do this thing where of being less political, or there's certain things that sometimes I feel moved away from doing, talking about current events, and I know certain. I just follow different astrologers, and some astrologers are very much about talking about the current events and how astrology you can see how that relates to astrology, and some astrologers just want to stay away from that, right? And I kind of have an attitude where the thing that I want is not really to avoid the current events entirely, but rather there's a certain political posturing that's like I don't condone anything, but I don't want to make content to put out on YouTube that makes anyone into an enemy based on their national identity, their ethnicity, their religion, anything like that. And I basically there's something inherently about astrology that relates to spirituality, and that even if I mean I don't know, like with Christianity, there's this thing about love your enemy. So even if they are your enemy, but I don't know how that relates to the whole, the military thing, right? You still, when you love them, but you're still going to war against them. I don't know. I'm not really, there's this whole thing. I'm not really a fan of wars or anything like this. Like, why would you be? Um, but okay, let's get the actual astrology and why this is relevant. Like, you can look at the conflict that opened up with Israel and Palestine and how that happened around the last lunar eclipse that we had in Scorpio back around. No, hold on. I guess that was Taurus during Scorpio season around Halloween. If you remember, that's when the whole Israel Palestine thing flared up. That happened around a lunar eclipse, and so the fact that we're seeing some kind of flaring up of this sort of tension around the next one that is in just a couple of days is you can see how it kind of goes with these eclipse cycles. The other thing, of course, is that the planet Mars, there's something that happens when planets change signs where the anaretic degree of each sign is means the killing degree, and Mars specifically is a violent planet. And another, like an example I often use about this is like, if you guys remember January 6th when President Donald Trump attempted what would we call it, an insurrection, where they led a whole bunch of angry men into the White House to try to take over, but obviously it wasn't, Biden got in anyways, and they didn't really have a good time with that. Whatever. But the thing is, the like that happened when Mars was in Aries, ingressing into Taurus at that anaretic degree. So there's certain things where you can like expect shit to happen around an eclipse and around Mars changing signs. Um, now, there's certain other things to mention, that now that Mars is in Pisces, we're going to eventually have a Mars-Saturn conjunction, and which is the two malefics together, which is maybe not really a bad thing, because there's something about the Mars is a little bit more yang, more like this kind of hot, aggressive kind of thing, and there's something about Saturn, which stands for coldness, and Pisces is like so it's kind of like putting like this hot, inflamed thing in like an ice water bath to cool it down, right? Um, which kind of reminds me a little bit about how in the history of treating what's known as schizophrenia, there, like, they used to call it dementia precox or whatever, that there was what they used to do was they used to like use these like ice cold like shock treatment, like not like there's like the electroshock therapy. There's also like they put people in these ice cold baths. Like if you're going to like really like cool them down to like to stop their state of their inflamed mind. There's Foucault talks about this, how apparently it actually came out of this story where there was a guy who was on some kind of like hospital transfer, right? They were transferring him from one like a hospital to an asylum or something like that, and he tried to make a break for it, right? He tried to escape out of this transport truck, and he like jumped out of the vehicle, or maybe it was before they had cars. It could have been a horse and carriage for all I know, maybe, right, further back into history. But this guy escaped, and he jumped into like this cold river, and then there was like when the authorities pulled him out, he was saying that there was something about like, I feel sane now. There's something, I jumped into this cold water, and the cold water brought me back to sanity, right? And then there's something about this one anecdote that they're like, well, maybe we should try in the hospital. We should try putting all the schizos in these like ice cold baths to sort of shock them back into their rational mind, right? So there could be something with the Mars and Saturn and the coolness of Pisces. And with Neptune kind of goes with this sort of like the delirium of visionary states and stuff like that. There's something, and I mean, while I'm on this sort of train of thought, I have to, I mean, I'm fairly open about the fact that, I don't know, I mean, I don't really want to take personal identification over the word schizo, because it's basically, by identifying as being schizo, you're identifying yourself as a threat to society and a danger, and basically somebody who is not going to get along with people, or that somebody who needs to be like socially isolated and imprisoned, and that's not really what my goal in life is, right? So like I generally want to aim for something better than just being a schizo. But naturally, part of the reason why I'm into astrology is because the schizo mind is a kind of a highly associative thinking, and by doing astrology, it gives me a certain kind of like outlet or a way to exercise this kind of associative mind without, with feeling like there's people that are, not that you can be on the same page with people that don't have different kinds of disorders or pathologies, or that you can say that you can read signs and symbols and experience a magical enchanted cosmos, and it doesn't necessarily, that itself isn't a pathology or whatever, right? And that was part of the original attraction to astrology for me. But there's certain things that I don't know if there's something like, I don't know if this is really like, there's something about that's using the other side of the brain. You're not just using your rational mind, and there's something about Neptune and Pisces and all this that kind of, but there could also be this thing about like, Saturn and Neptune being the sort of like hard skepticism, or this kind of like sense of disillusionment or whatever, that kind of thing that with the part of the dynamic with this Pisces stellium. But there's something, I'm just going to throw it out there, this thing that's on my mind that has been brought up by the recent current events of this thing with Russia is there's something about, okay, let's start like this. The whole Neptune and Pisces dynamic, obviously Pisces is a water sign. Water has to do with the emotions. It also has to do with the intuition. Like having a gut feeling about something, being sensitive and sensing some kind of energy, and maybe you're not sure where it's coming from, but it's not, you can tell that like there's something about Pisces that's about being like porous to and with especially Neptune being porous and sensitive to the environment, and you can kind of be like, you can pick up on stuff going on. And I was thinking about kind of, like there's this whole thing about what just happened in Russia, And the last night I was like, I don't know if I was like picking up on it or something, but I was felt the need to rewatch the Adam Curtis documentary "Can't Get You Out of My Head" um, for probably like the third time. I think I've watched it twice already, and there's something about it where it's like if I am feeling like there is the appropriate time to start watching Adam Curtis documentaries, it could be a sign that something is going on in current events, political events, and stuff like that. And like the thing is, I'm doing this thing where I'm not really keeping that up with the news. I'm not really, like one of the things about me, what I'm trying to do here about not or having this goal of being not so political or part of the thing is like I'm not doing this as a news pundit and I'm not doing this as an influencer to try to influence people to think one way or another or to say that I've got some sort of like like I really know what's going on, man. But rather that I like dealing with this intuitive faculty that I have, which may or may not really be useful, or it's kind of like I was reading I've been reading Liz Greene's book on Neptune, and she was talking about how like people develop all these psychic abilities, but a lot of the time it's kind of questionable whether there's any real practical value to having these abilities, right? So it's like, but there's something that's been on my mind about this specific thing that is I was just thinking about like Christopher Nolan and how last year Oppenheimer was such a big movie, and it's like I still haven't seen Oppenheimer yet. Um, but like I kind of felt like last year there's just also this whole thing going on where everybody's talking about like the end of the world and everything, and everybody's watching Oppenheimer in the theaters, and it's sort of like as somebody who's sensitive or whatever, like you can kind of feel that in the energy, even if you're not the one who's going out to watch the movie, that the collective imagination is all focusing around those kind of topics, right? And like I have a friend who is a little bit maybe has maybe more severe mental health problems, and this guy would get really paranoid about that kind of stuff, right? And I am just thankful that, I mean, I'm not that bad or about it or whatever, but like I think there's something about, like being sensitive and open, and it's like certain people are just having a bad reaction to something that's going around collectively, right? Um, but then there's also this question of, prophecy, being able to see a little bit beyond the linear time or what the rational mind is capable of. And I don't really know what there's this thing I have observed, and I don't know what I'm just gonna throw it out there because I don't know what to do with it. But that speaking of Christopher Nolan, do you guys remember that movie Tenet that came out during the pandemic? There's something about Tenet that I find kind of weird in that Tenet starts out with a scene that's a terrorist attack on a concert hall in what is it? Is it in Russia? Is that where it happens, or is it somewhere else? It's somewhere in Eastern Europe. I maybe need to rewatch this movie, but then there's this whole thing about how the plot line has to do with like Russian oligarchs and stuff like that. And the thing is, what I thought was kind of interesting, especially with this thing where I've been trying to say about like being sensitive and the crossover between like mental illness or prophetic visions and things like that, is death grips. Does anybody? I don't know. I'm not live streaming it, so it doesn't make sense to me for me to say. Does anybody know about death grips? I'll just assume that you people know who death grips are. One of the early death grips music videos is this. I think it was their first album, right? Or was it on Ex-Military that they did this song called Takyon? A tachyon is a particle that travels backwards through time, and that, and there's something about like the Death Grips music video for Takyon where this guy is like got a gas mask on and he comes down out of an air vent and he's in this like office building place that's kind of like nondescript. And there's something there's not it's pretty low budget music video. It's got some sort of like kind of basic kind of visual effects or whatever, but there's not really much going on. But this basic, there's something about, if you look at the Christopher Nolan movie Tenet, and you've got the these sort of like black ops paramilitary organizations. You've got a black male protagonist. You've got his face being masked by the gas mask, and you've got the attack on a Russian concert hall, and you've got Christopher Nolan has this the plot line about these bullets that travel backwards through time or whatever, or there's certain crossovers between these two time streams. And there's this sort of like thing about like it kind of look in some way it like looks like Christopher Nolan got the whole idea for the movie Tenet based on this Death Grips music video called Takyon. But then it could also be that Death Grips somehow did too many drugs and broke through the temporal time barrier and picked up on all this collective shit going on. And, well, I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there anyways. There's another thing about it, too, that like, there's this whole meme called the Backrooms, right? Where there, and I'm not going to get into that. Maybe I'll put a link down. But there's this whole, like, the Takyon video also seems to, how old is the Backrooms thing, right? And is Takyon an origin point for the Backrooms? Or is it, like, predicting the Backrooms? And I'm not going to even explain the Backrooms because I'm not really. It would just get me off track from whatever I'm trying to talk about. But similarly, I wanted to kind of like backtrack over the last certain comments about the last couple videos that I made, and I did a reading of a Marshall McLuhan chapter about the motor car that. On one hand, what can I say? I just wanted to explain something that there's something about my what has happened since in the meantime since making those last videos. I haven't been making them quite as regularly. I kind of slowed down a little bit. That I did all this stuff about like there's a certain like pressure to drive, or like the fact that I don't have my license and all this kind of stuff, or there's all this that there's something about what I'm trying to say is like being somewhat sensitive, being somewhat open, being kind of intuitive. But like the thing about it is like what I'm kind of starting to realize is that for the most part, a lot of what I'm picking up on is just like the low level collective noise of like it, like in a lot of people, like, if you're gonna be like, I am a sensitive intuitive and I'm here to be, serve my community, right, and I'm going to listen to what's going on in my community, a lot of it could just be pretty mundane stuff, and it could be like in this case, problems with gas prices. That's what I realized after recording the last couple of videos is that I went out for I went out to do some stuff, and I noticed like I don't drive, so I don't really pay attention to gas prices, but the gas prices where I live are astronomical, basically. And it's like it's also kind of like I had to look it up, right? That like within, because I didn't mention that like gas is subject to like the things that are most subject to inflation right now is basically fuel for cars, for airplanes, and cooking oils, right? And that it's like, oh, we're heading right into spring break, and there's these people with these big massive camper vans and all their like everybody's gonna go camping and go on vacation, and it's like all the fuel prices are super high, and it's like not only that, but I looked at it when I walked past the sign on the day when I was out doing stuff. Me being a non-driving person who walks past gas stations rather than I'm not going to want to brag and gloat, but I mean, this whole thing is that there's this kind of sense of this like weird pressure that everybody must drive, and then everybody who's driving is like feeling the pinch of the gas situation, and it was like at 193 or one was it one, or is it $1.93? And that was like apparently back a couple of years ago, the high was at like 155. So the gas prices are really, really high. And it's also, I live in British Columbia, and apparently British Columbia has the highest gas prices of all of Canada. So, I mean, maybe if there's, there's something about it where it's like, I realize that there's something about this where it's like, I'm sensitive and I'm open to whatever is going on in my environment. And what I'm picking up is like people who are stressed out about gas prices, and people living in an area where there are a lot of parents raising kids. And I'm not a I'm not a parent. I'm not raising kids. I don't have a car. But there's there's a sort of like feeling like an alien, because it's sort of like, oh, well, I'm in a place where everybody is stressed out about stuff that doesn't have any bearing on my life whatsoever. And, it's not really, no, maybe I can just, but the thing is, like, what do? Do I count myself lucky? Like, or like there's some sort of pressure that I have to like, in order to be a, like I'm going to be a fortune teller, or I'm going to be a natal chart reader and be a member of my community and serve the people who are around me, who are basically people who are stressed out about expensive gas prices and stressed out about raising their kids and all this kind of stuff. And meanwhile, I'm a person who doesn't have anything to offer them. And I don't want to be just like a smug asshole about avoiding the expenses that go with living in the situation, right? But that's like, it's kind of like, it's like the same thing, like when I mean, now we're in springtime, it's Aries season, but when it was more like winter, like there would be time, like BC doesn't have very cold winters a lot of the time. There's also, climate change and that, but there's times when you get up in the morning and if it's freezing, then it's just like I just like, oh my god, it's just like the chorus of a million people stressed out that their cars aren't going to start. And it's like, well, I don't, this thing about needing boundaries, but I mean, like being a kind of like a person who naturally, for some reason, doesn't really have the same boundaries other people do, or maybe it's just, maybe everybody is I have this suspicion anyways that everybody is affected on this at some level, but the way what you call the ego, or if you want to get scientific about it, there's this thing called the default mode network, is that like your mind filters out all this stuff and then creates a certain thought process that it becomes identified with, and that is what people usually call the ego mind, right? But when you are when you're more open and porous, this is kind of like the Neptune thing. The Neptune thing is kind of like going beyond that kind of linear ego mind and being open to all this stuff out there. And then so you can, rather than being like, okay, me as a person who doesn't have kids, who doesn't have a car, there's all this stuff that I can, it's the kind of thing about like, there's all these things where if you in a certain position, you're really affected by this. But if you are less identified with your individuality and you're paying attention to the collective, there's a lot of stuff going on in the collective that personally just doesn't really affect me, right? And, sometimes I wonder maybe if it's better to just not try to, sometimes I wonder, like maybe instead of doing an astrology channel for making a product for public consumption, maybe it's better to just stick to my own thing and not worry about all this collective stuff. But there's something about where you can't really switch it off. You can't really tune it out. You can't really, as much as you like to, you're part of the world with everybody else, right? And there's something about the sort of like the myth of Western individualism that, you know, you could take it like the Buddhist kind of approach of that there is the idea of a separate individuality is kind of like a lie, right? And that there are certain you know certain schools of thought that may be more invested in keeping this sense of individuality intact, right? And you know, maybe it's not such a bad thing to have a sense of separateness, a sense of individuality, of being your own person, that if somebody is stressed out because their car won't start, or that their gas is too expensive, or that their kids want a new pair of Nikes, or what, you know, you name it, that, you know, this isn't your problem. You don't have to be you don't have to get in the lemming pack and jump off the same cliff as everybody else. You know what I'm saying? But naturally, the point of you know what I'm saying? Like, there's this thing about like watching the pack. You know, like those packs of starlings, or they not packs. They call them, or they get called murmurs, right? But the big they don't look like individual. Like sometimes they go off in different directions, but oftentimes there's this big cloud of birds flying around, right? But it's interesting. I mean, not, you know, yeah. There's. I love my neighbor. I love this place where I live because I'm getting into appreciating bird watching more, right? Because we got crows, we got eagles. There's even a raven, which isn't even supposed to be here, right? Like, you know, ravens aren't even supposed to be in this area, but we've got spooky big ravens that make their funny sounds. We got massive eagles that will probably eat your pets if you're not careful. And you know, these things, they don't you know, different. Not all animals are gonna be like, you know, you're just a like a you know, like people talk about how fish are kind of like the dumbest animals, and they just kind of like mindlessly go in the, like, you know, eating algae and swimming around in a school of fish, right? And like, I think there's something about like the Neptune and Pisces, which is kind of like that. And but you don't have to be. There's other ways you can be. You don't have to be the starling. You don't have to be the brainless fish. You don't have to be a jellyfish. Like, you know, there's certain models of animals, you know, right? I don't know. I'm not getting to this spirit animal stuff right now though, but I don't know. We're okay. There's certain is there any other ideas I wanted to go over with this one? Um for those of you who are for watching, what I'm doing right now is called a long quiet pause that successful YouTubers will edit out of their videos because people just want to be hit with tons of information without any kind of contemplative break. They just want to have ideas and words and images just blasting them nonstop, you know? Like, if you want to have a successful YouTube video, you can't stop to contemplate anything. You can't slow down to consider whatever it is you're gonna say. You just have to like unleash a stream of bullshit on people. And so, if you want to have a successful YouTube channel, you shouldn't stop talking ever. You just have to talk nonstop and just blah 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 blah. I mean, you may have noticed that there's something with the eclipse. I did speak on this before, having to do with there's something Aries is usually considered to be more independent, and Libra is considered to have something more to do with the relational aspect or whatever. Um, their connection to society and all this kind of stuff. And I made some videos before about the kind of Libra eclipse themes, and I don't think I need to really repeat myself about this, but there is something, I think there's an interesting thing to contemplate around this eclipse, is that what does it really mean to be independent? What does it really mean to be an individual? What does it really mean to be part of a society? What does it really mean to be open to collective influences, but not necessarily being the lemming who's jumping off a cliff with everybody else? Not saying that everybody is, but I mean, there's also weird stuff happen. I saw in the news that like somebody there, like I used to, I mentioned this thing about Australia, right? That I spent a year hanging out in Australia, and one of the neighborhoods I used to hang out in, somebody like fell from a hot air balloon, which is kind of weird, right? And I think that may go with this sort of weird Pisces stellium, right? There's something kind of like eclipse season, Pisces stellium, and also, I mean, I don't know, I should maybe point out that something's going on where Venus and Saturn are rulers of Libra, and they just had a conjunction, and now Mars is joining the party. And so there's this Pisces stellium is related to this eclipse that we're having. Okay, I don't know. I think that's about it. I'm kind of taking these long pauses at the end here, but I think this is my basic what's on my mind today, anyways. All right. Well, thanks for supporting the channel. Thanks to all the new followers who are supporting the growth of this little endeavor that I've got going. All right, stay tuned for more, guys. Thank you very much.